He got fired from Kane, now we ain't got no shame. So we started a pod, took Yates to town.
Hey everybody, welcome to Chuck Yates Needs a Job, the podcast. In my ongoing series on the Railroad Commissioner, I guess we can kind of like title this Anybody But Wayne. I'm just kidding, Wayne. You're more than welcome on the podcast if you'd like. I'm just joking. We've had on Sarah Stodgener, who ran in the Republican primary. We had on Luke Warford, who is the Democratic nominee. So, of course, being that I'm the Libertarian, I had to have the Libertarian candidate on. So I got Jaime Diaz on today. Did I come anywhere close to pronouncing your name correctly?
That was super good. That was
no way, really?
Yeah, that was great. Jaime. So the thing with Jaime is it's Jamie in English, right? But
Yep.
in Spanish, the J's an H. So it's Jaime, and then my middle name's Andres, and which is like Andrew, and then my last name is Diez. That Diez is like the number 10 in Spanish. The only difference is that with Diez, there's no emphasis on the I, so it's just Diez. My last name is Diez with an accent on the I. So
listeners of the podcast know that I add 3 to 4 letters to every word in English. So the fact I got remotely close in Spanish is unbelievable. So let's do this. Who the hell are you?
So, like I said, my name's Jaime Diaz. I'm the Libertarian candidate for Railroad Commission. I grew up in Brownsville, Texas. I grew up there. My dad does immigration law down there, and my mom, she had her own flower shop when she had me. She left that and she raised me and my 2 other siblings. So I went, school up until college in Brownsville. Then when I went to college, actually my plan was originally to go into political science. So I went to school in DC, and in DC I was working with my congressman, Filemon Vela. It's actually a Democrat. And, I don't
So what college in DC?
George Washington.
George Washington. Okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I applied to Georgetown, but I didn't make the cut.
Now, is it still true? What used to be like when I was back in the day, so 100 years ago, the way you got into Georgetown was you applied to the nursing school. Is that still the trick you're supposed to do? You apply to the nursing school and then you show up and go, "Ooh, I changed my mind."
Yeah, that's the strategy. I didn't know that, but yeah, you have to apply to the easiest major in whatever school you apply to, and then from there, once you're in, you could transfer to whatever, right? But like for example, to UT, I applied to McCombs, and I did not get into McCombs, right? So, but I mean, if I would apply to UT, something not as.
It's crazy today. I mean, I don't know that I would have I would get into college today. Just kind of, it was really funny though. So way back in the day, Oklahoma was playing Nebraska on football. And so we're sitting around watching it on a Saturday. And, every one of the Nebraska football players, their major was general studies. And so we sat there all the next week calling the admissions office at Nebraska. We're really interested in this general studies major. Can you send us information? I think finally Nebraska was like, please stop calling.
Please.
All right. So George Washington, you're working with a Democratic congressman.
Yeah. And I mean, I just didn't like engaging in politics 24/7. That's basically DC, right? So I ended up switching back to Texas. I ended up going to school in SMU. And which is in Dallas, and I started off in economics, ended up switching over to engineering, to mechanical engineering. So that's what I graduated as. And once I finished my 4.5 years, I took an extra victory lap to finish. But as I finished that up, I decided to move back home to Texas to be with my family. I'd been away from them for almost 5 years at the time, right? So I moved back home in 2019. When I moved back, I was working scrap metal sales for a bit. That was interesting. I was doing software implementation. I worked for a while with a company in Mexico. In the U.S., it was doing software or research, like market analysis, and I got paid in pesos. That was not fun, but I learned a lot. And then COVID started. So COVID kind of, I guess I moved back, and I just moved back to Brownsville with the intention of just doing whatever I could, right?
Right.
So living with my parents, And COVID starts, and basically whatever momentum I had, it just kind of dried up. So a friend of mine actually suggested, hey, there's gonna be the school board election. Why don't you run for that? So I never even considered running for office. I was 24 at the time. I figured, like, let's try it out, right? How hard could it be?
Hold on. Decorum is actually going to make me ID you because I don't believe you're 24 right now.
No, I was 24 at the time.
Well, I don't think you're 24 right now. You're so young looking.
Oh.
But I say that as a compliment because trust me, in 20 years, you're going to love it. No, I'm just kidding.
No. I mean, I still get ID to buy beer sometimes.
Holy cow.
26.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
You are 26.
Yeah, no, that's what came in my shirt, because if I don't wear this shirt, I look like I'm 14 years old. Yeah, I mean, if I had it my way, I would just wear a t-shirt.
We support that at Digital Wildcatters. We're okay with that. So, all righty. So COVID's hitting. Your friend's saying run for school board.
Mm-hmm. So first off, like, I went online, right, and I Googled, how to sign up for an election. The only prerequisite is just you have to be 18 to run for school board. And there's 3 documents, I think, from the state. It's a TAC, the treasurer's assignment, and some other one. Simple enough. I printed them out, signed up, took them to BISD, to the Brownsville Independent School District building, signed up for the election, and I mean, I started just learn about BISD, to learn about the different issues that were affecting the school board. And I was also able to get a campaign together. It was just me and my friends. We didn't hire any professionals. So it was a lot of fun. And we didn't win. It was 3 candidates. We ended up getting second place. But during that time was when I got really into Bitcoin. So when the pandemic started, and they built out their airlines pretty quick into it, right? And when I was younger, when I was actually in George Washington, my dad had bought me Stress Test by Timothy Gartner. And I mean, the first third of the book's talking about the moral hazard of bailing out the banks, right? That if you bail out the banks now, you're going to set a precedent that, that too big to fail banks can do whatever they want.
Right.
If things get bad, they're going to get bailed out again. So, when COVID starts, I'm like, the airlines, they're not going to get bailed out. Moral hazard, right? And they got bailed out immediately. And at which point, I kind of started to think something's wrong here, right? So I ordered Ray Dalio has a series of 3 books, and they're called Big Debt Crises. And I started reading that, and it was just talking about companies with lots of debt, how they get out of it normally, right? And the book, they were out saying usually they get out of it because they raise taxes on the rich, which usually leads to capital flight. They
lo and behold, rich people can change their behavior, and they employ lawyers and accountants to do it. Yeah, go ahead.
And yeah, they could also just inflate their currency away, right? If the debt that they owe in the denominated currency, that they control, so through inflation. And then the other 2 are just default, just we're not going to pay it, and that's it. And the fourth one is kind of like a soft default. So I'm not going to pay you back all the money, but let's renegotiate, right, the debt. So those were the 4, and I was like, wow, looks like it's going to end. I mean, this big debt crisis can't end well for the dollar at the very least. So I mean, first I wanted to see how I could buy gold, right? But I mean that was, I mean, I wanted to custody my own gold,
right?
And that, I mean, it was just too much. So I ended up getting into Bitcoin, and so I bought some Bitcoin, bought some more. And I think 2 months in, I had all my money in Bitcoin, and I still have all my money in Bitcoin.
So what levels are you buying in at back then? Pre-pandemic, what, 5,000?
No, so it was scary when I started buying, because I started buying right after the 5,000 dip.
Okay,
and it was around it was going around like 9 to 10 around that time. So I was worried, because I was like, wow, if I buy now and we dip back to 5, well, I'm down 50%, right? But I mean, I figured, lots of times in my life, I've been like, well, I should buy later on when the price gets lower. And I always regret it, because the price always goes higher whenever I get in that mentality. So I'm like, I'm going to buy now. If it goes down to 5,000, I'll buy more. But I'm not going to sit on the sidelines just because when I'm looking at the little price chart, it used to be at 5, right? So this was around 9, 10. And I mean, from there I had rallies. It would go back down, do little rallies. It never went back down to 5. But that was around the time that I got into Bitcoin, and then I started reading the Bitcoin Standard, right? Like everybody into Bitcoin does, and it talks about Austrian economics, which I had never heard about in my entire life. And so I got really into that. Just Austrian economics, it's just the idea that in free markets the government should stay out of it. It's very much in favor of just letting the business cycle play itself out without intervention, in favor of lots of creative destruction, right? So a good example, I guess, is kind of like the forestry system in California. How when there's like little fires, they put them out real quick, and then this creates this macro environment for these huge wildfires to then manifest themselves. And that I feel like that was kind of like what we had seen with the 08 crisis, at least with the bailouts, and now heading into COVID, I was like, wow, so this might be the big wildfire, right? That. And so I was into Austrian economics, to Bitcoin, and then with school board. When you're for school board, all of the teachers unions, they all send you questionnaires to fill out, and one of them asked me about school choice, about charter schools. And I mean, this is my thinking. I mean, if anybody wants to correct me on why I'm wrong, I would love to hear it. But my thinking was, well, if the school board's not doing a good job as it is, right? Ultimately, the victims are the children, right? So if parents think that that their kid would be better off serviced in a charter school, I mean, by all means, they should be able to get a voucher, take that to a charter school. And end of the day, it pushes the ISD to do a better job, right? By at least allowing some free market, I guess, and allowing parents to vote where their kids want to go to school at, right? So that got me down the libertarian rabbit hole. And
this is like, I'm about to break out in tears. This is so beautiful. We've taken, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we've taken, growing up, probably more liberal of a Democrat, and we actually reasoned and we read and we studied, and now we're a libertarian. This is great. No, because my issue on the school front is people are always, you're name whatever ist you are, racist, whatever, if you don't support public education. And I always come back with, I actually can live with public education. I don't like your delivery mechanism. Your delivery mechanism is the same as my great-great-grandfather went to. It's a public monopoly. If you live on this street, you go to that school. And so it's not that I'm opposed to public education. I can kind of live with, we as a society are better off if everyone's educated, therefore let's all kick into the kitty. But to not have competition introduced there, I mean, there's not a monopoly on the planet that doesn't suck. I mean, is there a good monopoly?
I mean, it'd be hard to argue. I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree there. So you become so studying to run for the school board, all this, you become the libertarian. So why in God's name do you want to be a railroad commissioner?
Well, I mean, taking it just a step further, I think it's interesting that you said that about being a Democrat, because at least engaging with the public, usually when I talk to Republicans, I mean, they know what a libertarian is and they understand it. Democrats in general have no clue what a libertarian is. And I mean, that was at least me growing up. I knew that there's Republicans, Democrats. I knew that there was a Green Party, and I knew that there's a Libertarian Party. I had absolutely no clue what either of the two stood for, right? And yeah, I mean, I think that is interesting in regards to at least the party's messaging, that Democrats really don't know what a libertarian is, or at least in my opinion. And so going back to the road commission thing. So when this happened, I started giving $25 to the party a year just to do a small contribution. And I mean, at this point, I was also done with politics. It's not really fun to run for office.
It sucks.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
We don't need people digging into my background.
I mean, I'm 26, right? So I grew up in the era of the cell phone. So
yeah,
I mean, if you dig.
Oh no, I mean, God, if we had cell phones back in the day, oh my gosh.
No, but the nervous laugh, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
no, mom.
no,
I didn't
I'm
actually
playing.
do that.
Yeah. But so I started giving $25 to the party a year, and eventually somebody from the party, or not from the party, just a libertarian reached out to me because I ended up giving $25 to the Libertarian Booster Pack as a donation, and they reached out. They're like, hey, we saw you getting money. You're from South Texas. Tell us about yourself, right? So I just told them, look, I'm basically what I told you right now, right? And they're like, all right, hung up the phone. Didn't think much of it, right? And oh no, the reason that they reached out is because on the flyer that they sent me for the booster pack, they had asked, do you want to run for office? Do you want to volunteer? Or do you want the party suggestion, right? So like I didn't really want to volunteer because I mean I was the only libertarian that I knew in Brownsville, so I'm like, I'm not going to do a party of one here in Brownsville. like give me your suggestion on what I can do. Maybe I can, I don't know, help you with memes or something, right? And they ended up calling me back a couple days later, and well, this friend of mine, he's like, so Jaime, I think it'd be good if you ran for office. How do you feel about that? Like, well, I just ran for school board. It was so. But what are you thinking, right? And I was thinking maybe like something, I don't know, municipal level, something like that. And he tells me, he's like, I think it'd be a good idea if you ran for road commission. Which, I mean, at that point, I understood what road commission was. I understood it was a misnomer. I understood it oversaw the oil and gas industry. Actually, some guy that I, or some man that I know, he actually was road commissioner. He's from Brownsville. He went to my high school as well. And so I had a bright idea of what it was. And I'm like, look, I mean, I'm not sure I'm your candidate. I'm 20. I was 25 years old at the time. I'm 26 now. I'm 25 years old, and he told me, he's like, look, you're young, but I mean that's fine. You study engineering in college, and I mean a lot of the, at least concepts in regards to the oil and gas industry, they do stem out of engineering, mechanical engineering. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of fluid dynamics. So and I'm like, all right, look, because I'm also bad at saying no, right? I'm like, look, if you can't find anybody else to run, I'll sign up, but I mean, find someone, different. And in reality, this stemmed more, I guess, from my own. Like, I think in life, a lot of times people, want to feel ready to do something. And you always put off doing things that you want to do because you don't feel like you're ready yet. Right. And I felt like that was kind of like me at that moment, right? Like in reality, I was aware that, most people in the road commission don't have any oil and gas background. They don't know anything about the industry. But I felt that, I guess it was a lack of, I guess, I mean, irrespective of that. So we left it at that, hung up the phone, and he called me back the 8th of December. The deadline to sign up is the 10th. And he's like, Jaime, we didn't find anybody else. Would you be willing to sign up?
What a sales pitch.
And I'm like, well, I'm a man of my word, so I mean, I guess I will. So I think the 8th or 9th, I put in my I guess the paper to sign up for road commission, and I bought a bunch of books. Started reading up about it. At least got more or less versed on what the issues were, and it's fascinating, especially because you're dealing with so many different rights in regards to the road commission. Like, for example, you've got the people that own the mineral rights, the people that own the surface rights. You've got, people access the groundwater. You've got people that, at least breathe in the air, right? So that they have rights to clean air. So as a road commissioner, I guess you're kind of, so there's a good quote by Thomas Sowell that the quote goes, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And I think that that's very true, especially with the road commission, that it's hard to sometimes say, where my rights start and yours begin. But I do think that the road commission at the very least needs a little more transparency in regards to how it makes those trade-offs.
So this is actually really cool, because let me tell you what I kind of struggle with. And I was in oil and gas for, call it, 25 years. And the free market principles as a libertarian it's really easy to apply to sneaker companies, right? If Nike makes crappy shoes, go buy Adidas, right? And the market punishes those that make bad sneakers. I believe, Mark, to your point about trade-offs, I agree. There is no utopia. Guess what? Trotsky was wrong. I mean, there is no utopia. There are only these trade-offs. I even think markets do a better job with social type issues. If the Yankees don't want to sign a black player, guess what? The Dodgers will. And I generally have a belief that the freer the markets are, the better folks have a tendency to do, et cetera. The one thing that I'm going to kind of challenge you to do, being the libertarian looking at our industry, is we got to figure out how to navigate that. And let me throw some things at you. One, our product is literally a barrel of oil that goes on a global market. So you don't know if you bought a Diamondback barrel of oil. You don't know if you bought a Pioneer barrel of oil. So there's an element of the consumer, looking at the oil and gas company, doesn't know what they just bought. And plus it's got to go through the refineries, all that sort of stuff. There's that. The second thing that happens, you and I both talked about how we despise monopolies. In effect, when an oil and gas company signs a lease to go, we go to Farmer Bob and we say, hey, you're 20,000 acre, we want to sign a lease because we want to drill here. You've in effect created a monopoly on that 20,000 acres. And that leads to difficulties because there are rights that Farmer Bob has in that lease. Hey, if you don't drill wells over certain times, if you stop production, I can go lease to somebody else. But for the most part, I mean, literally there are leases in effect 100 years out in our business where you've created monopolies. And so it's going to be interesting watching you with your libertarian beliefs study this industry and figure out where is that balance. Because even me, the libertarian, and I'm all for free markets and blah blah blah, you go, there's got to be at least somewhat of a framework there, and I don't know that I have a good answer for it.
Yeah, it's funny. Like one of the things I think is interesting is, for example, flared gas, right? How right now it's an issue that lots of people talk about. And it's funny because at least when you're talking about flared gas, you not only have to see it at least in regards to Texas, but also in regards to at the national and international level, right? So, I mean, if you just say, like, for example, we flared X amount of cubic feet of let's say casting head gas in Texas last year, right? That means nothing, right? Because you have to normalize it in regards to at least how many barrels were extracted, right?
Right.
And the thing is that, for example, like if you do look at least the flaring intensities, so how much gas is flared versus how many barrels of oil are extracted. In Texas, it's much slower than the rest of the world, right? So if you're an environmentalist group, I mean, your gut instinct would say, well, let's stop flaring in Texas, right? Which, I mean, would then also require them taking these wells offline, which would also boost the price of the barrel, right? But I guess those are secondary effects because their only objective is to stop flaring. The thing is that, well, in a net, now that oil that's not being produced by Texans is being produced elsewhere, right? In areas in which, at least the environmental practices aren't as, let's say, conscientious, right?
Sure.
So as a whole, you've actually probably increased the amount of flaring internationally, right? And at least whenever you're talking about these issues, you're talking in respects to the atmosphere, right? It's not like the atmosphere is like, oh, well, this is, let's say a cubic foot of methane into the atmosphere from China. It's only going to affect China, not the U.S. That's not the way it works. You know
what I say on the podcast? There's not a peeing and non-peeing part of the pool. Somebody pees in the pool, you got pee in the pool.
You know, pool.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And I think one of the things that's frustrating for me, because I think energy is so important that it deserves a fair, intellectually honest discussion, because you just framed something that's real. I mean, there is a cost to society of flaring. I mean, CO2 emissions, pollution. I may think the cost is this much. Greta may think it's this much. In the end of all humanity, there is a cost. And right now, there's no price on it, right? There's only regulation to stop it. So we're, so that would say, oh, Chuck, so you're for a carbon tax. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I do get usually where markets work best is when everything's priced in, because then you can punish the bad stuff. But where I was going with this is I think one of the things you're going to face is exactly that. It's the relative thing versus the absolute. The environmentalist is the absolute, no flaring. The relative person is like, well, let's triple oil production in Texas. One, because we flare less. And number two, we can at least watch it if it's here. I guarantee you there's nobody wearing a Greenpeace t-shirt watching the oil production in Venezuela, So
yeah, it's funny because growing up on the border, you're very aware of both sides, right? What happens in the US, what happens in Mexico, right? And it's funny because you have lots of people that, have strong opinions in regards to how things should be done in the US. Yet, they have no problems buying something else made in Mexico with not great working conditions. And it's very much like out of sight, out of mind. The thing is that at least regulations is not necessarily, I think, the answer to a lot of this stuff. Like, for example, right now in the Bitcoin space, they've been doing a lot of mining with flared gas, right? The nice thing about mining with flared gas is that it at least monetizes an asset that prior wasn't or that previously you couldn't monetize, right? That you would flare it off, the casting head gas. The thing is that, if we impose regulations in the US to limit flaring, they're not going to respect that abroad. The thing is that if we innovate and do stuff like, for example, start mining Bitcoin to monetize that stranded energy asset, well, now all of a sudden, they're doing it in Russia, they're doing it in, Iraq, Iran, they're doing it in Nigeria, and they're not doing it because they care about the environment. They're caring about it because it makes them money. But the thing is that at least through allowing innovation in Texas, you're creating things that are not only environmentally favorable, but that are also economically viable and economically self-sufficient. So I think that that's a great way to reframe at least the way that we look at energy policy within the state of Texas.
Yeah, no, I think definitely as we sit here and we have these discussions, the way I kind of frame it up is we ignore CO2 going from 300 parts per million to, where are we today? 425 parts per million in the environment. And it looks like the temperature's up 1.5 points because of that. Now, some would argue the environmentalists always choose 1850 as the year, kind of the baseline, because it was the lowest year in the last 10,000 years. But we can debate that. I do think we ignore it at our own peril. That being said, to your trade-offs point, which is a great one, is hydrocarbons and the burning of it do a lot for our standard of living. And the only people that can afford to go to net zero are the people that have really high standards of living, i.e. America, i.e. Europe. Africa cannot go net zero and have any sort of standard of living. Asia is still struggling with it. So I think kind of the balancing act you do is really twofold. Is one, we've got to get people to as high a standard of living as possible, as quick as possible. That's number one. And then number two, technological innovation, human ingenuity, that's going to be what solves this problem. It is truly not going to be, we're going to put a wind turbine on every corner. It's not going to happen. And I don't think it's even fair to suggest that as something. So you got to balance that. And ultimately what technology comes down to, if we're going to solve this problem, shots on goal. We need way more of it. We need to be funding that. We need inventors inventing, scientists doing research, entrepreneurs starting companies. Because at the end of the day, that's how 2050, 2100, that's how we're going to get to net zero. It's not going to be because we all decide to go live in thatch huts.
It's fascinating. Like, even for example, in regards to the solar panel and wind turbine and battery packs, all that technology. And people will tell me all the time, they'll be like, but we have to transition to renewables. It's cheaper. It's like, all right, if it's cheaper, do you have solar panels and a battery pack in your own home. And they never say they do. Because it's really not cheaper once you actually get to installing it and at least the battery pack doesn't last forever. It decays. It's like your phone battery. You have to replace it every so often. And it's really not cheaper than just, being plugged into the grid, right? And then the grid for a large part of the power does come from fossil fuels. It's I think that's always like a very interesting point in regards to renewables. Also, right now with our energy crisis, it's not like, over there in Europe or in Germany, they're calling, for more wind turbines or more solar panels. They're not. I mean, they want more fossil fuels. That's what they need to burn and keep the lights on.
You know what? I'm gonna push back on you a little bit because this is weird. So about a month ago, I was over in Europe with the 3 kids. They were being such a pain in the ass. It's like, where do y'all want to go? I want to go here. I want to go here. Finally, I was just like, all right, Kelly, name a city. She goes, Berlin. I go, okay. Sarah, name a city. Madrid. Charlie, name a city. Barcelona. So that's where we went. Berlin, Barcelona, Madrid. What was interesting about being in Berlin, could you think that Germany's going to be ground zero for this? I mean, they are falling off a cliff like nothing. None of the cab drivers are bitching about high gasoline prices. None of the shopkeepers, restaurants. And look, I get it. I don't speak German, so it's not like these were my best buddies and we were having heart-to-heart talks over beers. But you know how when you travel, you talk to people and stuff. There didn't seem to be any sort of concept or discussion or realization of just what's going on there. And so I posted that on Twitter. I got some feedback from some folks. One person just said, well, the German government's kind of subsidizing the energy costs. So to some degree, the populace doesn't know. I don't know if that's true or not, but okay, that kind of makes sense. And the second thing somebody tweeted back is the Germans are just austere. I mean, they are going to pay their bill. They're not going to bitch about it. I mean, one of the funniest things I've ever seen is the Germans lecturing the Greeks on debt when the Greek debt crisis was going on. I mean, talk about, they almost took a ruler out and slapped the Greeks on the hand when it was but, because I think what ultimately needs to happen to have a thoughtful energy policy, because I'm not anti-renewables. To your point, if they really are cheaper, let them go win in the market. Or why do we have to have all these tax credits to get them built if they truly are cheaper? But, at the end of the day, it's going to take, I think, popular uprising of the people demanding a thoughtful energy policy, as opposed to we're going to get a president elected who's thoughtful about energy and leads the charge in that direction.
Yeah. It's also funny, like another thing that, I mean, just through this campaign, I'm trying to just absorb information and just, is that the US, it's not a democracy. The US, it's a constitutional republic. And the founding fathers were very thoughtful in regards to making it that. So the founding fathers thought that at least a democracy, at least a pure democracy in which, you elect a president, kind of does whatever he wants. They kind of assume that would devolve into mob rule, right? And that usually results in the majority oppressing a minority, right? So that's why they, made the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, to establish certain rights that all individuals are entitled to. And I mean, and then you also elect your representatives to then represent you. But I mean, while the Constitution protects certain rights that you have, right? And the thing is that I don't really think it's inappropriate for politicians to be saying, like, this is the energy that we're going to be using going on into the future. I mean, as a politician, you're not there for an industry. You're kind of just there to, I guess, protect individuals, the interests of society, right? However you want to measure that. But I mean, in regards to a politician being there on behalf of renewables or on behalf of oil and gas, I mean, at least personally, I feel like, so far as everyone's respecting everybody, I really don't care if you're using renewables or oil and gas, right? But let the market decide that. Like, at least the tax credit scheme, it's, from my understanding, I'm not too sure how it works, but I'm just going to say it aloud, and then if I'm wrong, you could correct me. But at least how I understand it is that there's investment tax credit and there's a production tax credit, right? And what these credits do is that if you're a utility, the government will pay you to take off your coal, nuclear, natural gas energy if there's renewable supply coming onto the market, right? So they'll pay you to basically favor renewables as opposed to these other ones, right? Which it does create a lot of problems, especially if you're, I mean, one of these, if you're a natural gas utility, a coal power plant, a nuclear plant, because I mean now, I mean the government's explicitly favoring one form of energy versus another, right? And I kind of don't feel like that's the role of the government, but I mean, this is my opinion.
Well, you're the one running for office, so you should give your opinion.
Yeah.
No, because the problem I have with the government is, you know, I'm a libertarian, so I think, you know, at the end of the day, they shouldn't even meet. They shouldn't get together. You know, the world's way too important to allow them to make laws. But no, you're right. I mean, when they start picking favorites, and the problem is they're not being intellectually honest about those favorites. Hey, because I don't know how all the tax credits work in the renewable space, but I get pitch deals all the time where it's like, hey, if we fund this solar farm, we'll get all our money back through tax credits. So if the farm makes any money, that's where we'll actually make some, but your downside is zero. You'll get all your money back. So I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. But if the government's going to favor that, the government also needs to say, hey, when the sun is not shining, we will not have electricity. If it's a really, really cloudy day, guess what? We're not going to have electricity on that day. So we're pushing this, but don't assume you're going to have the reliability, the base load that a coal plant can provide or a nuclear plant can provide. And that's my problem, that they're not being intellectually honest about it. I'm with you. I wish government didn't have opinions about that kind of stuff, but yeah, to not even be intellectually honest about it.
Yeah. No, and people don't really even understand at least how a grid works, you know. Whenever I talk to people at the Road Commission, I try to more explain why we do need you know, some baseload power, some peaker plants, natural gas plants, and how at least putting a sporadic load like renewables onto there makes the operation of the grid itself very complicated, right? So that's one thing that when I talk to people, they don't understand that very well. So I feel like once we're able to at least establish that, then we're able to have a more constructive conversation. Even in regards to, you mentioned the carbon credits, which I think is really funny because, you know, whenever they mention carbon credits, they mention it in regards to the oil and gas sector, right? But it's like, I mean, okay. Well, first off, there's interesting discussion going on in regards to carbon dioxide in itself, right? Like there's no debate on whether or not carbon dioxide heats the atmosphere. It does, but it also doesn't heat the atmosphere in a linear rate, right? So for example, if you're putting in 1 ton of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the second ton that you're emitting is only going to have half the greenhouse effect of the first one, right? Or so, for example, 1 ton of carbon dioxide heats the atmosphere by 1 degree, then that second ton is only going to heat it by half a degree, right? So it's kind of like how do you say it? It's logarithmic. It kind of like asymptotes off. So I mean, first off, that's one thing that is interesting, right? Secondly, like you were saying, if you look at it at least historically, there's been points that we've had way higher carbon dioxide than we've had today. And then secondly, there's that whole which I started looking into it recently. I've had people talk to me about it. And I'm just curious about the what's it? It's like the fertilizer effect or the greening effect. That more carbon dioxide is better for the plants.
It
to
is
breathe
plant
in.
food.
It's plant food.
Yeah, that's what they do. I always say that technology to get rid of CO2 in the atmosphere actually exists. It's called a plant. There's also a whole diatribe I've done like a couple of times on the podcast. You know what one of the greatest removers of carbon on the planet is? It's actually the whale. So if you think about it, we had, call it 5 million whales on the planet. We figure out whale blubber is really good. We burn lamps on it and all that. So what do? We kill as many whales as we can. We got Moby Dick out there, you know, going to town. So we take the whale population. I think the whale population today is about 1.2 million whales out there. That's what we've done over the last 200 years. What's interesting is a whale will sequester carbon in its body of like, I don't know, 33, 35 tons. And what does it do? It dies and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. So it takes the carbon away. So that's one thing that it does. The second thing is what actually filters out, call it 40% of the CO2 on the planet? Plankton. You know, I mean, algae in the ocean, right? Basically. And the greatest fertilizer for plankton is whale poop. You know, it's got all the nutrients in it that plankton needs. So in effect, I mean, we potentially have done the rise in carbon by just getting rid of the whales, you know? And so anyway, I throw that out there because no, I think you're right. I mean, I think we do know that more CO2 will warm. We just don't know how much CO2 actually leads to the warming versus bigger forces. I mean, you know, for a while there, the Russians were able to track the temperature on the Earth based on solar flares, you know, and actually said it had nothing to do with our environment. So, but again, I don't want to come off as a climate denier, but because I do think we ignore this at our own peril. My whole point is we need to know what we don't know, and be careful and measured on how we get there. So,
well, and the thing that I was going out with that whole, I guess, like side train of thought was that they never talk about, for example, putting a carbon tax on solar panels or wind turbines that we make in China. I mean, why not?
Well, or put a slave labor tax on it.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
all the solar panels are made in slave labor.
I mean, but it's a thing. That's my big issue with the carbon tax. That it seems almost directed towards oil and gas industry, which, I mean, that's fine. If you want to do a war on carbon dioxide, which if you want to do that, I mean, let's make it across the board. We can't just make it in regards to, but kind of like what I was saying, very much out of mind, out of sight, and people don't mind.
I've said on Twitter, and I think I've said this on the podcast before too, is the person that ought to pay to plug in and abandon all the old wells in the state of Texas ought to be Amazon. Because they're the ones, in all seriousness, since the shale revolution, and we had minus $37 oil there for a while. I mean, who benefited? It was all their vans running around, all the transportation. They're the ones that truly benefited from low oil prices, more so than the companies. I don't think that gets there. So let's do this. All right. So you're running for railroad commissioner. You got Wayne, you got Luke. What have you generated, if any, in terms of positions? You got a website? You're gonna do all that so people can read what you're thinking?
Yeah. I've got a website on there. I guess one of the big issues that we're focusing on is orphan wells. At least, for example, if I become railroad commissioner, I would like that by the time my 6-year tenure ends, which that would be the end of it. There would be no second term. I want to live my life as a non-politician. I would like to actually see the number of orphan wells going down year by year, right? Which as of now, I guess the amount of wells that the state's currently plugging versus the amount of wells that the state's currently taking online, or I guess orphan wells that the state's currently taking online. I mean, the amount of orphan wells in Texas is going up and up and up, right? So we're not actually getting on top of that issue. Another thing,
and I'll say this is that's actually just a matter of enforcing the laws that are on the books. That's not a new law. I think a fair ask from the Railroad Commission might be, give me a little more money so I can hire 25 other people to drive around and make sure that's happening. But I don't think that's really a big deal. And I will say this. Generally, my sense is with oil and gas companies, I mean, we used to take the position, 20 years ago when we buy a property, old wellbores were actually worth the equipment you could yank out of them, right? So, we can get $50,000 worth of equipment out there. It'll cost us $10,000 to plug it. Boom, we got $40,000 there. We used to kind of look at it, watching that through the years, it became, and we didn't even include that in the analysis of what to pay. But then, later on, it's like, all right, we're going to have to plug all these wells. Let's put that money in. But it was always 30 and 40 years out, so it didn't matter. I mean, my last days at Kane, that was like the first sheet. We have this many wells. Here's the schedule over the next 5 years to get rid of them. And so it's being taken seriously, but there does need to be some herding of the cats there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like right now, opening up a tire recycling facility in South Texas in Brownsville. And we're just shredding tires up into crumb rubber. So like rubber powder, rubber granule. And because of the TCQ requires that we have a bond in place for in case we go bankrupt so that the tires can all be taken care of, right? So like, for example, I feel like having financial assurances in place so something happens to the company or at least some kind of plan. I think that'd be a good step forward. Besides that, I do think that, I mean, like you were saying before, I do think they need some kind of regulation, right, in order to at least protect our private property rights and also our individual freedoms. I don't think you need a lot of it. The thing that I do think that so a candidate for road commission for the Libertarian Party, I think 4 or 6 years ago, suggested an idea that every year 10% of all regulations on the books should be reevaluated for efficacy, right? So just, how is this regulation made? Is it, at least accomplishing the intended result? And if not, I mean, get rid of it or change it. But the thing is that, I mean, regulations are interesting, right? Because one hand, you buy regulations that actually do serve the public right at large. And then, but you also have regulations that are just there to, raise operating costs and just force small companies into consolidating to bigger ones and to basically leverage the government to force these, super big companies, right? Which in reality that doesn't service anybody. So you've got, I guess, two theories in regards to governance. You've got a command and control, right? So it's one that you set a very rigid framework in regards to how companies should operate, which in general, bigger companies tend to like this because they always know that as long as they act within the parameters, if anything goes wrong, they could always say, hey, we were being compliant. It's not our fault. And they could point the finger back to the regulator and no one gets in trouble.
Plus, they can afford to have the compliance department because it's spread over a lot more revenue than me and you starting an oil and gas company and having to go hire a third partner to do compliance. Yeah.
That would be fun.
No, it wouldn't. If I ever buy another working interest, just shoot me. And I will testify on your behalf to the judge. Yes. Yes. I told him to shoot me if I buy a working interest again.
And the other theory, I guess, is retribution, restitution and retribution, right? So the thing is, make it clear that, for example, if you make a mess, you have to clean it up, So I think it's a Benjamin Franklin quote that says that an ounce of the cure is worth a pound of the
prevention.
Or
no, pound
backwards.
Of prevention.
I screwed it up.
Is worth it.
Ounce of the cure. Yeah. And
the hard thing about that, because I kind of agree with you, is unfortunately, if we leave that wide open and unfettered, it's decided in the courts. Yeah. And so potentially what I think we have to do, and we actually did this in Texas on tort reform, is you kind of have to put the framework around it. We're going to say that if you're in Ector County and your water gets destroyed by the oil and gas company, it's worth X. Mm-hmm. And we may all not agree on X, or some people don't like it or whatever, but at least give framework to what the fight's about so that those issues can get settled in a consistent and faster way than just everybody go sue and let's let every judge decide this case or that case.
Well, it's also like, for example, if let's say Chevron does something bad in I don't know, on my property, right? Let's say I've got 100 acres or 1,000 acres, right? I mean, I don't have the resources to go out there and make a case against how, this oil and gas operation contaminated my groundwater or whatever, right? So at least like in the normal judicial system, if you don't have means, you get hired, you get a public defendant to represent you, right? And I do think that the road commission should at least have some kind of mechanism in place, maybe a public defendant type system. Which I'm saying this,
Yeah, this is high level. This is high level. No, I actually kind of like that. Maybe it's the maybe they settle all disputes on Chuck Yates Needs a Job the podcast. Come in, we will say the People's Court. But
I would support that.
I wouldn't. That sounds miserable. But by the way, the funniest dispute I ever had is we had leased some land. I want to say this was northern Louisiana or it was Oklahoma. And the CEO calls me up and goes, well, we got sued today. And I'm like, oh man, what? And he goes, well, a landowner sued us claiming that I impregnated one of their cows. And I was like, well, did you? the CEO was pissed. But no, of course not. But yeah, no, I would love to have a case like that on Chuck Yates Needs a Job, the podcast. Not a big aquifer damaging issue.
What happened there? What did the court say or what?
You know what kind of sucked about it? It took about a year to get that case thrown out. I mean, it was ultimately thrown out. I mean, but I think we even filed in a response like a copy of Grey's Anatomy, the book, saying it's impossible for interspecies impregnation.
Oh, so they thought he did it?
Yeah,
personally,
like him personally.
Oh, I thought you brought a cow or something.
No, like a bull in. No.
Oh, man,
he was named.
That's absurd.
That's why he didn't talk to me for about 2 months because of my comment on, well, did you? So I like this. So we're going to enforce the rules on the books. We're going to get rid of abandoned wells. We're going to figure out some dispute mechanism that's potentially more fair.
Yeah, well, the retribution or the restitution and retribution versus command and control, I'm just saying that we should defer whenever possible to restitution and retribution type system, right? But like you're saying, it's not feasible all the time because you're dealing with, lots of, very large negative externalities that could, come about, through at least improper regulation. But so that there is a big one. Well, what else? I completely lost my train of thought.
That's all right. I do like the coming on and pledging the one term.
Oh yeah.
Well, you know who my hero is? My hero is Cincinnatus. He was a Roman emperor, and what had happened was Rome was being invaded, or something like that. And they made him emperor, and he went out and he fought off the Spartans or whoever he fought off. And he served as emperor for 19 days, and then he quit and he went back to till the fields because he's like, y'all only needed me for those 19 days. Yeah. I've squelched the rebellion or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's funny. People don't realize that. The Road Commission matters a lot, right? And it's significant. But the thing is that I think a lot of times, at least, same happened to me when I ran my first race, is that you get so involved with the issues that you kind of forget about things that actually matter. Like, for example, like right now, me and you are here having a conversation, and it's nice. We're having a little moment, right? We probably won't see each other again, most likely. And the thing is that whenever you're running for office, you kind of, put a set of blinders on, right? And you kind of forget about all things that actually matter and are in front of you. Like, for example, with this whole campaign, I've been able to spend less time with my family, less time with my friends, which I love them a lot. And I like my yoga practice. I've really lacked on my yoga practice. And there are things that are small, but I do think that there's lots of significance in at least devoting yourself to those smaller things. And sometimes when you start focusing on the macro too much, it kind of does take away a lot of your happiness, per se. So that's kind of why I said the one term thing, because at the end of the day, I want to live my life. It's not like I want to be a politician my entire life.
And you also get caught up in the trappings. I mean, it's pretty easy to become a congressman, and all of a sudden you're being driven everywhere you want to go, and companies roll out lavish dinners for you and all. And it's just, and I think that's actually really healthy to say, hey, I'm going to do it one term. So you can actually, if company XYZ walks in with big campaign checks, I don't need it. I'm not running again. I think there's some health to that. So I closed with Luke with the big question, and I'll close with you the same thing. Any nudity on this campaign?
Any nudity?
Sarah got her into the runoff with the pump jack video. What's the plan?
We've still got 60 days or 65 days or whatever it is, so it'll be to be determined.
Oh, nice. But, there we go. Stay tuned on that.
I'll leave it suspenseful.
Hey, well, I appreciate you coming in and talking. This was fun, and I'm actually impressed with, for not being an energy industry veteran, how you've picked stuff up. And I actually hope you continue, because the libertarians do need a voice here, because what I think we've got, what I always say about the Republicans and the Democrats is the Democrats are Trotsky and the Republicans are Stalin. Neither one of them's any good. So appreciate you coming in, and I hope you stick with it.
No, I appreciate a lot, Chuck. Thanks a lot.